Winning office doesn't mean winning power. Power has to be won every day on the streets, in the workplaces, in City Hall, in public meetings, on social media. It's a never-ending struggle. So we celebrate, we use the joy in order to power the continuation of the struggle.
As people often say, the Democratic Party, changes you, not the other way around.
And we are thus becoming a failed continent. Our failures mean that we are becoming a clear and present danger for the global South, for the global majority. That's fascism. We saw this in the 1920s, we saw it in the 1930s, we're seeing it again. But if they come up against a solidarity movement which manages to mobilize the many, they panic and they make mistakes and they fall flat on their face.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. The world feels like it's spinning off its axis. From the U.S. openly renaming its Defense Department the Department of War and threatening new conflicts abroad, to Trump's tariff crusade and crackdowns on dissent at home, we're watching the rise of an openly fascistic order, one that's dismantling the little bit of democracy we have left in real time. But amidst this darkness, there are glimmers of hope. In New York City, Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani won the mayoral race while proudly defending Palestine and rejecting Israel's genocide, a victory that stunned the political establishment. So what does this moment tell us about the future of global capitalism, the limits of reform, and whether there's still space for real resistance inside systems built to crush it? Joining me to discuss this and more is Yanis Varoufakis, economist, political leader, former Greek finance minister, and author of many books, including Technofeudalism, What Killed Capitalism. He's also co-founder of the international grassroots movement, DM25, and a professor of economics at the University of Athens. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthroughnews. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And smash that like button, subscribe, and share this episode. It helps boost us in the algorithm that hates us. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Yanis Varoufakis, welcome back to Dispatches on Breakthrough News. It's always an honor to have you on.
It's great to be back, Rania. It's very good to see you again.
It's great to see you again. There's so much to catch up on because it seems like the world changes pretty dramatically every week these days. And it's been a pretty dark year. So I want to talk to you about some of the bright things that have taken place. I want to talk to you about the mayoral win of Zohran Mamdani, especially from your perspective and your experience in winning elections. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the fact that it feels like the fascists are in charge and keep gaining more power. I want to talk to you about the European view, the world bowing down to Trump, some updates on this tariff war, and maybe if we have time, we can get a little bit to the aggression that's targeting Latin America and the sort of fake ceasefire in Gaza. So kind of want to go around the world with you, but I want to start with Zohran Mamdani because, I saw a really good live stream with you and Richard Wolff yesterday. And I got a chance to be at the victory rally last week and to cover it for Breakthrough News. So our audience is well aware of Zohran Mamdani and the mayoral win. I think some things stand out, Yanis, that I'd love your commentary on. First and foremost, in a country like the US, this guy won on a democratic socialist ticket. The word socialism was front and center. And more importantly, the red baiting didn't work against him. They tried so hard. The other issue that's pretty significant here is that he ran on opposition to genocide in Gaza. He stayed very clear on that throughout the race. He didn't capitulate. They weaponized anti-Semitism against him to the best of their abilities. It didn't work. And he was able to win as a Muslim, self-described democratic socialist, pro-Palestine individual in New York City, which has the second largest Jewish population in the world, and a huge chunk of Jewish New Yorkers voted for him. So before we kind of get into if he can get things done or not, I'm curious if you can give us your perspective on, watching this guy win in this political climate.
Well, before we get stuck into will he get things done, I think we have earned the right to celebrate just with a couple of more days, because we have been facing defeat after defeat everywhere in the world, in the United States, in Latin America. Think of Milei, not to mention the genocide, the killing fields in Ukraine, the continuing war there. I'm not going to enumerate all our defeats. So let's just savor the victory for a moment. And let's congratulate Zohran, not just for the victory, but for the stance that he held on to after the victory. I was very pleased with what he had to say after. He didn't go into the normal centrist soliloquy of, I'm going to be the mayor for everyone and there will be no costs to anyone and everything's going to be hunky-dory next morning. No, he said, if you think that we've won and that's it, you're very wrong. This is when the struggle begins. We are going to face the money men again down the road. We beat them at the ballot box, but now they're going to try to exact their pound of flesh. They're going to try to get their revenge on us when we're in City Hall. And, if you think that your work is done, you're very, very wrong. Your work, folks, is just about to commence. I thought this was splendid because essentially what he's saying is that winning office doesn't mean winning power. Power has to be won every day on the streets, in the workplaces, in City Hall, in public meetings, on social media. It's a never-ending struggle. So we celebrate, we use the joy in order to power the continuation of the struggle. I think it's another breath of fresh air that's come to us from New York City is what you mentioned, Rania, that the fact that a large chunk of the Jewish community of New York City voted for a Muslim who is supporting the rights of Palestinians. Essentially, they proved that our best comrades against the scourge of Zionism, against the scourge of genocide, are the Jewish comrades who are, for them, it's a double whammy having to struggle against this because, they are facing accusations of being self-hating and all that. I don't need to go into that. So essentially, it was the Liberation Day for our Jewish comrades. And from us, from our perspective, it's a reminder that Zionism is essentially the continuation of anti-Semitism by other means. I remember I was in England. I remember when there was this awful attack on a synagogue in Birmingham, I believe. And I happened to be in a BBC studio and I was asked very seriously, don't you think this is the time, out of respect for the Jewish community in Birmingham, to stop the demonstrations against Israel? I said, no, exactly the opposite. Because what you're doing is you're assuming that the Jewish community is responsible for the genocide. And I can think of no worse anti-Semitism than that. So, Mamdani's victory adds that vignette to it. And primarily, above all, everything else, here in Europe, you had lots of people celebrating Mamdani, which is a great thing. But some of them were the center left, the radical centrists who saw it as a victory against Trump, which is also true. But they missed the point that this is a man who actually, a young man, who didn't just go against Trump. He went against the money men. And it's usually men, right? Some money women too, but mostly the money men. He went against the Democratic establishment. He went against the Republican establishment. He went against the MAGA, and he beat them all. And he beat them all with the help of no one else, except from the little people out there who put in their time and a little bit of money that they have to make sure that it is possible to imagine a victory of those who, on the one hand, talk about affordability, talk about privilege, talk about inequality, but at the same time, because Trump also talked about affordability, does not betray the people that he claims to represent upon winning office.
Yeah, it's really, I think all of that is completely relevant. But then I want to go to the other side of things. And one thing I heard you say is, it's important. Of course, we should celebrate, have a moment of celebration, especially when everything else has been so dark. The popularity of socialism is very apparent. The popularity of supporting Palestinian rights is very apparent. However, we shouldn't romanticize, right? And that's where I go to the fact that, he did still run inside the Democratic Party. And this is a very powerful machine that will and is already trying to tame his program. And, his program is not radical. His program is actually very logical. It's just sadly the American ruling class is so right wing that the idea of a modest tax increase on the wealthiest people, just 2%, is considered like, communism or something, when actually it's a pretty typical normal thing that should have been done long, long ago. The idea of free buses is great. It shouldn't be considered that radical. The idea of subsidized grocery stores shouldn't be considered that radical, but this is the country we're in. So the fact that, the entire Democratic establishment is going to use all the weight they can to try to make him capitulate, that's important to recognize. And I hope he's powerful enough to withstand it. And I hope people who supported him continue to hold him accountable to his promises, because he's going to need that. And as people often say, the Democratic Party, changes you, not the other way around. So we'll see. But there's also the threat of the Trump administration itself, which is promising to make it impossible for him to govern. They're already threatening to withhold federal funds, kind of, I joke, but it's not that much of a joke that this is their way of sanctioning New York City as part of a regime change war. They're also threatening to send in the National Guard, it's like an intervention to overthrow or coup Mamdani. But all that's to say, it's not going to be easy for him. So I guess I from your perspective, I'm curious what you have to say from two angles here. One is, you mentioned that he said people need to stay, organizing for these policies, because that's the only way he's going to be able to actually make them reality. And two, you were once a part of an insurgent progressive movement in your country, and you resigned over some capitulation to the neoliberal hawk. So I guess all that's to say, what are the lessons to be learned from your own experience?
Well, a couple at least. One is that your own party is often your worst enemy. When it is led or underpinned by the urge of some of the stalwarts of your own party to become respectable members of the establishment. And that's when the backstabbing begins. And that's when you have to be ready to resign. You have to be ready to go back to the people and say, okay, that office was not for me. The only way of remaining in it was by capitulating and turning against you. I'm not doing this. I'm coming back to you. Let's all win it back again. So that's the first lesson, to be ready to resign, not in order to retreat, but in order to go forward and to keep fighting. You see, remember when Donald Trump was shot and he came out and he said, fight, fight, fight. Well, that's what we need to do on the side of the majority. Nobody in the United States has done that, except, let's say, Bernie Sanders and a few other people. And this is an opportunity to show that we are in the business of fighting for the majority, for the 99%, the 99.9% even. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two is that the establishment is a paper tiger. It has huge quantities of power. They can wreak havoc. They can do their worst. They can bring in the National Guard. They can starve your funds and so on and so forth. But if they come up against a solidarity movement which manages to mobilize the many, they panic and they make mistakes and they fall flat on their face. So do not make the mistake to think that just because they have exorbitant power, that they are capable of defeating us come what may. They're not. So, these two messages. The enemy is sillier and flimsier than it looks, and the enemy within is the real threat.
The enemy within is the real threat. I mean, it also speaks to the fact that, this is a bigger question. I don't think that we can answer it. I certainly don't know the answer, but I've heard a lot of debate being prompted by this win about reformism, like reformist versus revolutionary. And obviously, Zohran Mamdani winning the mayoral race brings to question whether reform inside capitalism is possible. Versus people who just want to smash the system. I mean, I'm of the belief that you need both kinds of people. You need those people on the inside and you need those people on the outside. But I guess I'm just curious where you stand on that debate, the reformism, the electoralism versus the sort of like revolutionary movement building outside of the system that maybe isn't capable of reforming.
Well, if you don't aim for a revolution, you can't reform. So it's not either or. If you and I were going to go to Zohran now and say, look, Zohran, you have to start a revolution, he would be obliged to laugh us all the way out of his office, because he won a municipality. He didn't win government. He didn't win the keys to the Federal Reserve. He did not win a majority in the Senate. So let's walk before we run, folks. Okay. So it's not a question: do we want to walk or do we want to run? We want to run, but first we need to walk. So I'm not saying anything particularly wise. I think this is common sense. All big things start small, but it's no small thing to introduce free daycare for, parents in New York City. It's no small thing to have free buses. It is small, but symbolically it is gigantic. It shows people that things can happen on behalf of the powerless, and therefore that the powerless are not as powerless as they thought they were. That's the first step towards building up a revolutionary movement. And the revolutionary movement, when we talk about revolution, it's not going to happen the way it happened in 1917 in Moscow, right? We're not going to storm the Winter Palace, and there's no need to do it. Donald Trump, the way in which the Soviet Union collapsed, there are many historical examples of how you can have radical change without actually taking up arms, without even violating the Constitution at all. Especially, when you have the masses with you, then the establishment will violate the Constitution from stopping you from introducing, by constitutional means, a proper revolution. So, let's not, allow ourselves to be carried away. It is important to keep our feet on the ground, and it is important to begin with to realize and materialize the 3-4 promises of Mamdani in New York City. That's how you begin. You gain credibility by keeping the roads safe, by having free buses, by having grocery stores in the food deserts. You do all that, and then you up the ante. And then you keep upping the ante until the system reveals its own authoritarianism. They send the National Guard in. That if you have gained credibility amongst the people by giving them free buses, and then the National Guard comes in as a result of them having free buses, they will come out to defend their free buses. And, there can be no greater revolution than that. And then you have a discussion about workplace democracy. And then you can talk about corporate law. Should we allow buybacks in the stock exchange? Should we allow derivatives? Should we perhaps consider the possibility that the only way we can live with AI is if AI is not owned by the 0.00001%, but maybe it should be owned by the workers that actually use it? And that, Rania, this is a very big question. This is a hugely revolutionary point, but it is also something that common folks out there who've never heard of revolution, who don't want a revolution, can appreciate. So, for instance, let me give you a very brief example. Suppose you have a company of 100 people and they're producing widgets, whatever, these things, right? And there is an AI-empowered technology that can produce the same number of widgets at the same cost for, using 50 workers, not 100. Now, if this is owned by a private equity company, right, what it will do is they will bring the AI machinery in, and they will fire 50 workers. And then you and I will have to find ways of sustaining them. That is, society will have to find a way of sustaining. But if these companies run on the basis of one employee, one share, one vote, then they gather together and say, do we want to use these AI technologies? Say, yeah, damn, yes, we do. Because that way we can work half the day Instead of 8 hours a week, we work 4 hours a week. And nobody gets fired. And the rest of the day, the 4 hours that we now have spare, we can use it to look after the elderly, our kids, write a poem, go back to school, do something useful. Instead of doing the chore of producing the bloody widgets. And, that way you make people think, hang on a second, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we should have one person, one share, one vote. That's how you move on. You start from the buses and from the grocery stores, and you move to the production, the socialization of the means of production. And that's revolution.
If you have a conscience, it's unbearable to be plugged into the corporate media machine right now. These outlets are accomplices in genocide, running cover for the war machine. Breakthrough has become the go-to outlet for those who want something different. But the funds we've used to start this platform are starting to run out. We'd never dream of turning to mainstream corporate funding. So we're turning to you. Become a patron. For as little as $5 a month, you can become an essential part of our fight to not just break through the mainstream media, but create something that can challenge it. We have to become completely viewer-supported, or this platform we've built could go away. Don't just watch us, join us. I wanted to ask you about Europe and the way it sees America right now, since you are there. And the reason I raise that too is maybe from a global perspective, Yanis, because, one thing I noticed about this election, and, I live in Beirut, though I've been here for the last month, but the world does need American politics to change very, very badly, because America is this empire that is just, 1,000 military bases, has its hands in everything, in very disastrous ways. It's gotten, I think, even more disastrous with the Trump takeover, because it's just kind of like everything is raw brute force. And I think that's why this mayoral race captured not just national attention in the US, but international attention. That's why I think, my friends in Lebanon were watching. America has such a stranglehold over the world that a mayoral race that had a progressive candidate like Zohran Mamdani gave people on every continent some modicum of hope. So I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on the fact that the US is kind of like this global dictator, and why that makes it so important for politics here to change.
Well, under the Roman Empire, events in Rome mattered to all the colonies, to all the, the parts and bits and pieces of the empire. Similarly, during the British Empire, events in London. I remember, I'm sure you've read about that. You're too young to remember it. I am old enough to remember it. There was a delegation of French communists that visited Hanoi in Vietnam to talk to Ho Chi Minh back in 1973, 1974. And they asked him, what can we do to help the struggle of the Vietnamese people against imperialism? And he said, how about staging a revolution in Paris and taking over your government? That speaks to the point. But at the same time, we need to keep, as I said before, our feet firmly on the ground, because winning a municipal election is not the same thing as changing national politics and international politics. It's a very good first step, but it is only that. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the various leftists that I associate with, people that I disagree with who are on the center left, I call them radical centrists, they say, you see, Mamdani did it. How did he do it? Because he had 4 policies, and he stuck to them. Well, we can't do this at the national level. I mean, I'm leading a political party here in Greece, and, I wish we could do it. Stick to 2, 3, 4 issues and just hammer away at them. But when you're running for national government, for Congress, let's say, you have to have a position on health. You have to have a position on education. You have to have a position on Palestine. You have to have a position on Ukraine, on NATO, on climate, the climate catastrophe, on everything. You can't not. It's irresponsible not to. So that's not when it comes to a mayoral election, a municipal election. You have one issue. You can be on one issue. Say, for instance, affordability rents. You could even have one just on that. But so, we can't extrapolate from the municipal to the national. Now, you said that something which is absolutely right, that given that we live in the age of the American empire, we still live in the age of the American empire, it would be wonderful, as Ho Chi Minh said to the French communists, if you folks in the United States staged a revolution. We would love it. The rest of us would, we wouldn't believe our luck. But at the same time, it is crucial, since you asked me about Europe, to acknowledge the fact that Europe is a very large continent, almost 500 million people, extremely rich continent and privileged continent, a continent which lacks the federal system that America has, and therefore it is fragmenting. We have federalized our money, we have the euro, but we have not federated our government. We don't have an investment policy, a health policy, and an energy policy for Europe. And we are thus becoming a failed continent. Our failures mean that we are becoming a clear and present danger for the global South, for the global majority. So, as Europeans, we have a duty to take over the levers of power in Europe, not just on behalf of Europeans, but also on behalf of the rest of the world. In the same way that the American progressives have to, keep repeating Mamdani's victory in New York City, we have to do something similar in Europe, and we have no excuse for not doing it.
And to that degree, I wanted to ask you, in terms of what's taking place in the US, and then we can kind of move to the European view on that. I'm sure you saw they've renamed the Department of Defense, the Department of War, which I think is a more fitting name, actually, because it's more honest. And recently, Pete Hegseth, the, I guess now Secretary of War, said the following. He said, "We're not preparing for a period of peace. Instead, we're shifting the Pentagon and military industrial base into an actual state of war." He said, "The moment feels like 1939. Or I hope 1981. Enemies are gathering and threats are mounting. You feel it and I feel it." And I guess all that's to say, given everything that we're seeing, especially in the last few months with Trump sending the military into U.S. cities, you're seeing ICE kidnapping and disappearing people, this really unprecedented war inside the U.S. on anyone, not just the left, but really anyone to the left of MAGA. I'm curious how the U.S. looks from Europe right now, and if you think we're in an era of fascism or entering into one, because you do have fascist elements in this current ruling government in the US.
Absolutely, you do. Absolutely, you do. But so do we here in Europe, right? I mean, we're not far behind you, even though the center is there.
Oh, God.
We're not far behind you. Look, Rania, when capitalism reaches a dead end, when capital finds it very difficult to accumulate, except through speculation, as is the situation now in the United States, it's been for a while, and Europe, the discontent that mounts with the diminution of the prospects of the majority, when the left is not putting forward a program of national renaissance, let's say, or, of looking after the many, of reversing the incredible, mind-numbing increases in inequality, in income inequality, in wealth inequality. When that doesn't happen, some populist is going to stand on a soapbox and say, the nation is being defrauded by its elites. The nation is being poisoned. Its bloodstream is being taken over by miasmata, to use an ancient Greek word, effectively by impurities. We need to purify the blood of the nation. And we need to do this by getting rid of the Jews, the Muslims, the Mexicans, the others that are the impurities in the system. We are proposing that you give us absolute authority to do this. We are going to look after you. We're going to increase your minimum wage, give you a little bit more of a pension, and give you $2,000 from the tariffs. Remember what Trump said the other day in response to Mamdani's victory? And the deal is this. You're going to give us absolute power. Forget about having a voice, trade unions, representation, democracy, and all that. And we are going to purify the nation. And we are going to do this by turning against the foreign bodies within, the migrants, the trans, the women, whatever, the women who have cats and, they don't want to reproduce their DNA in order to make America great again. And at the same time, we are going to build up our military in order to turn against the other, the foreigners, all these bodies that are looking at our borders as in the same way that viruses look at the skin of the human organism. And we're going to zap them out, and we're going to take international law in our own hands, and we're going to blast out of the water small fishing boats in the Atlantic or the Pacific in Central America, and we're going to do it at will. And it doesn't matter if we kill people that happen to be innocent, because we're doing this to purify the nation. That's fascism. We saw this in the 1920s, we saw it in the 1930s, we're seeing it again. And Rania, it's not a great puzzle why this is happening, because our generation went through its 1929 moment when Wall Street collapsed and the Great Depression fell upon the land, both the European land and the American land, in 2008. And it was the centrists like Barack Obama who betrayed the promise of a New Deal and begot Donald Trump in the same way that it was the Social Democrats and the liberals in the Weimar Republic and elsewhere in Europe that begat fascism. So, at least we should have learned that lesson.
You would think, but here we are. And it's really scary too, because, there's obviously like a fight and we're at an inflection point in the US and I think in the world, and there's people pushing back. And I think the win of Zohran Mamdani shows you that there are obviously a lot of forces. I mean, Trump is incredibly unpopular. But the fact of the matter also remains that he has all the levers of power right now. And then you look around the world, Yanis, and you see world leaders bowing down to him. It's actually quite embarrassing to watch. I mean, really sucking up to him. You've got Canada like apologizing to him out of fear of the tariffs. I can't remember if it was the Pakistani prime minister or president. I think it was the prime minister who at that fake Gaza peace summit like made this ridiculous speech saying Donald Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. You had the South Korean president not too long ago giving him a golden crown. I mean, this behavior is embarrassing, but it's also scary because it's like nobody's standing up to him. Nobody is standing up to this fascistic administration, and it's emboldening them. So I guess I want to broaden it out to the globe and ask, what are your thoughts about the state of the world? Because yes, of course, we have the past to look to, but I think something interesting here is that when you look globally, there seem to be no poles of resistance to Donald Trump. And maybe I'm wrong to think that way, and I'm stuck in an American bubble where I'm just frightened of the turn of this country. But yes, I would love your thoughts on the world bowing down to him.
Since the 1970s, the United States establishment elite under the Nixon administration, and following that, the Paul Volcker administration of the Federal Reserve, who, by the way, was in the Nixon team when they blew up the Bretton Woods system and started the ball rolling, for a new form of hegemony that humanity had never seen before. Up until the 1970s, the end of the Bretton Woods system, every empire that went into debt, went into a deficit, stopped having a surplus and started having a deficit, lost its hegemony. Whether it was the Roman Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire. Not the United States. The United States lost its surpluses towards the end of the 1960s. And what the Nixon administration did with Paul Volcker, continuing those policies into the 1980s under Reagan, up until 1987, when he passed the baton on to Alan Greenspan, was a remarkable phenomenon. Here you have the hegemon, the empire, that goes into the red, and the deeper it sinks into the red, the greater its hegemonic power, right? The opposite of what was happening with all the other empires. And the reason that happened was because they weaponized the US dollar. Essentially, the US dollar became the reserve currency of the world in a way that the British pound and the Spanish and Dutch currencies never were. In the sense that instead of having reserves in gold, the German central bank, the French German bank, the Chinese central bank eventually, of course the Japanese central bank, used the dollar as its reserves. Now that meant that the United States could keep increasing its trade deficit in relation to the rest of the world and get stronger as a result of it, not the United States, but the ruling class of the United States, the bourgeoisie of the United States, the lords in the two coasts, East Coast and the West Coast. Why? Because the more produce they were purchasing from Germany, from Italy, from Japan, and later from China, these net imports into the United States, the more dollars they sent to them. But if you're a German capitalist, a Japanese capitalist, a Chinese capitalist, and you receive these dollars, what do you do with them? You can't spend them at home. So you have to send them back to Wall Street to recycle them in three ways. Government debt, US government debt. So effectively, the foreign capitalists were financing the budget deficit of the United States since the 1970s. Secondly, real estate. That's created Trump and his realtor friends. They would never have been rich if it wasn't for German, Chinese, Japanese capital, which was the flip side of the American trade deficit flowing back into the United States. And the third thing, of course, is shares. Whatever shares they were allowed to purchase in the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and so on. So, and why am I saying that? When you see the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, being reduced to such a pathetic sight in the Oval Office, sitting there like that, next to the French president, next to the British prime minister, next to the Japanese prime minister, and they're all, calming down. You know why that is? Because German industry will go kaput. It will die tomorrow if they can't sell their net exports to the United States. So it's the deficit of the United States that keeps those capitalists going at the expense of both the American working class and the German working class. So this is not America versus Germany. It is an alliance of American realtors, bankers, German industrialists against blue-collar workers in the United States, blue-collar workers and the middle classes in Germany. Now, that is what we need to understand in order to understand where Trump is getting his power from. He didn't invent it. Richard Nixon, Paul Volcker, Reagan later, and so on, and Clinton, they all worked very hard to establish this on behalf of the realtors, the Wall Street bankers, and the private equity people. This is what they did, and they sold American technology down the road, down the line, and this is where we are now. Now, the Pakistani prime minister was extremely cynical because he said what he said, which was pretty pathetic. Exactly. Yeah. I think he was trolling him in a sense. If you look at Pakistan, Pakistan is playing an interesting game. On the one hand, it had its military capabilities come from China. It shot down Indian airplanes that were French-made using Chinese tech, not something that Trump likes. It came into an agreement, a nuclear pact with Saudi Arabia, extending its nuclear umbrella over Saudi Arabia. That is not something that Trump liked. And at the same time, pacifies the big boy bully who is in the White House by offering him, as if it was in his gift to offer it, a Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. You said that there's no great pushback against the United States. That's not true. It's called China. China is acting like the only adult in the room. They have been very careful. They have not tried to antagonize him, but they have not cowed to Donald Trump. They've actually blooded his nose on a number of occasions. Every time he put up his tariffs, they put up their tariffs. When Donald Trump tried to bully them again, they banned exports of rare earths to the United States. That would have been a serious blow to American military conglomerates. And he took it all back. he retreated. So, and China is moving ahead. I mean, unlike the United States, which is essentially wasting its resources simply in order to maximize the capitalization of 8 companies in the New York Stock Exchange at the expense of the interests of the majority of Americans, of the vast majority of Americans. The Chinese are very steadfastly and meticulously building up their productive capacity, and they're building up the social state, and they're building up their social welfare, and they're regulating their big conglomerates. So it isn't true that there is no pushback. And let's not forget that you have a whole continent in Africa, which in the last year only has been financed to the tune of $240 billion, where you have countries like Ghana and other countries where you have huge increases in green energy, which is being subsidized by Chinese solar power, for instance. Right? So there is all this happening, and Trump is attracting the headlines, and he's causing European Lilliputian leaders to disgrace themselves by lining up in the White House in order to be chastised. But I don't believe that the global majority out there is following Europe's leaders and Japan's leaders down the road to subservience to the great Donald.
The dear leader, geez. I'm so slick. I changed my camera. Well, you were in the middle of giving that fantastic explanation. I don't know if you can tell the difference, but I'm not stalling anymore.
Yes, you are looking good.
Oh, thank you. These tech issues, man. But I do want to ask about you started giving some backstory to it, but the last time I had you on was during the domination of the tariff conversation. And that was, I think, maybe like half a year ago at this point. So I wanted to get a tariff update from you because some time has passed now. When I had you on, Trump was just kind of like starting up his tariff war. You warned that we shouldn't write off Trump as some idiot because actually he does have a plan, and you explained what that plan was and that it might actually work, might not work. So now, several months later, as we've seen some of this played out, where do things stand from your analysis with this Trump war? Is Trump winning or is Trump losing?
Well, Trump has won the tariff war. It's very clear. Remember when...
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.